Warning, this episode of High Trust Low Context contains a little bit of choice language. No, there's no profanity. No, there's no blasphemy. No, there's no cursing. And there's no false swearing. But there is vulgarity. Lots of it. So if you plan on listening to this with your kids in the room or at work, this might not be the episode for that. So put on those headphones or skip to the next episode. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the official position of the host, other guests, or any affiliated entities. Each participant is responsible for their own statements and opinions. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hola, mi enchada! Welcome to another edition of High Trust, Low Context, Episode 8, Doomsday Hoaxes. I'm your host, El Chaco, and joining me again tonight, this show's first guest making his first return, Mr. Tab Birt. Welcome back, Tab.
Good to be back, everybody.
Tell us what you're drinking tonight there, Tabbert.
Well, you know, there's a lot of unrest in the Middle East, so I'm not choosing sides, but I am drinking this wonderful M&H Distillery Elements, a single malt whiskey aged in sherry casks, which is, in my opinion, the best way to get a delicious whiskey by putting it in a sherry cask. This is, of course, the first whiskey that comes directly out of Tel Aviv, Israel. So, you know, I think the chosen people should really support this episode, and I'm going to put this up as product placement.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I got to gain their support back after my last guest. So, excuse my cough tonight. I got getting hit with the allergy season here.
I feel you.
Yeah, the mango tree that doesn't produce mangoes, it sure produces a lot of pollen for some reason. But yeah, so you're throwing your support into Israeli whiskeys, which means that you are not breaking any. Oh, go ahead.
At the same time, so years ago, when I bought this whiskey, I also I bought a German whiskey at the same time. So you know, I try and be an equal opportunity whiskey consumer. As soon as Hamas has a whiskey available, I'll have my own little war, my own World War III beginnings by just sampling whiskeys in my house.
Well, yeah, and then you got to throw in like a Russian vodka or something like that absolutely. In there to even things out. Well, at least you won't be accused of Israeli boycotting, which I think is illegal in some countries, or sorry, some states. Is it illegal in Missouri? I don't know.
Probably. I mean, you can't say anything about what goes on in Israel without getting shut down, which is ridiculous because, you know, it's basically just a tax haven. We just pour money over there. That's what America does in all these countries. We just Ukraine, Israel, South America. We just pour money into these countries, and then it's like, what do we get out of that? No, nothing.
You get the world's greatest ally, Tab. You get the world's greatest ally that you could possibly have. That definitely loves you guys, and everything's working out just perfectly. I mean, you don't have to send any troops over or armaments or keep the military industrial complex going. And we're still live on YouTube, so we haven't been pulled off yet. That's good. Yeah. But man, thanks.
They just sent like $8 billion over to Israel, and so I did the math on it. It's like $25 per person living in America right now. Would you send $25 to Israel under any circumstances? Would you? I mean, no.
Only if it comes with whiskey attached to it, like what you've got going on there. So
that's a good point.
But welcome back to the show. I mean, as you can see, I've kind of cleaned up the place a little bit. Just still doing a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of home cleaning here, and getting my feet on the ground. So far, so good. I think. I agree. You've been able to keep up with the show so far. What's your impression so far after after 7 episodes in your ears?
I really, I've been enjoying it. I usually reserve it for the days that I drive my car to work and not ride my bike, just because it's easier to hear when you're not listening to the sound of your engine rev right next to your head. So sometimes I'll fall behind and I'll have to play catch up for a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I have only gotten the only episode that I caught live was Nick Rekieta's episode,
Which was a great episode, by the
which
way.
was a really
He
great episode. I was glad that I caught it live. I hit the beginning of it on while I was on my way home in the car, and then once I got home, I like just screenshot it to the TV and ate dinner. And
Oh,
I thought
nice.
that was a really fascinating conversation you guys had about like jurisprudence and how the country was designed, the Constitution was designed to allow us to change it, but instead we now use the courts to change everything we do constantly, which then
Yeah.
allows Congress to not do their job and the presidency to not do its job. Um, and I thought that was all really rather interesting.
The courts have a lot of power there. I mean, like, disproportionate to what they were supposed to have, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's
And we're kinda witnessing that. I mean, I don't know if you like, I think when you were on before, we talked briefly about Infowars, and again, I'm not a viewer of Infowars unless they've got something crazy going on, like when
mhm.
Ye came on and like the mask and did the whole Benjamin Netanyahu.
Netanyahu,
Yeah,
Netanyahu, yeah, that was
that was-
wild.
but like, um, you're witnessing so much of this going on right now. I mean, like with what Trump is going through in the court system. Owen Schroyer, so he's one of the co-hosts on Infowars, I believe. So he just got, I think, 60 days in prison for his, presence at January at the 6th day of the year in 2021,
Yeah.
and he I don't know, man. Like he tried to appeal it, and then the judge threw that out. And it's just like I still feel like everywhere is now a kangaroo court. Everything is just kind of, you know, it's just it. They
Well,
call it culture war a reason.
but also with that, right? Even when you do win your day in courts, they just find a different rule. So, Michigan, during the scamdemic and all the lockdowns, the the rulings they were making were being held unconstitutional by superior courts, and then they would just, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan just went out the next day and basically
Got
put the
kidnapped.
exact same executive order into force, but instead of saying that it's coming from, paragraph C subsection A of this document, it's now coming from paragraph G subsection D of some other document. And
Right.
it's like you're circumventing the spirit of the law, and and like you've already been told no, and now the
They don't
idea
care.
itself is bad.
They
And
don't care.
no, they don't care. All they care about is like punishing us for wanting to be free, I guess. I don't know. I really hate all government, and um people, it's hard to talk about it that way in with people because they just assume when you're like, yeah, I hate Joe Biden and I hate Nancy Pelosi and I hate Mitch McConnell. They're like, well, you're just like you're a leftist, or you're an evil conservative. But then I want to talk about the other side and say like, I think Donald Trump was an ineffectual president and a distraction to the real problems that are going on. I am a cuck and therefore also need to be destroyed. And it's like
You're a mad
we
cuck.
can't have a fucking conversation with anybody around us about what's actually going on. The fact that the whole game is just like this shell game where we can, trade around what's what, and then at the end
Well,
of the
and
day, we're all getting screwed.
well, like, okay, so up in Canada, so I apologize to my American listeners in advance. Next week, my guest is going to be Mark from Canada Poly, which is a really great podcast that covers Canadian politics, and it's pretty much the only way that I follow the scene up there anymore, because I don't want to click on anything from CBC. I don't want to click on anything from CTV Global or anything like that, because I know at this point now they can't be trusted. So he does a really good job of backing these things up. But one of the things that's really getting on my nerves. So, for example, up in Canada, there's a class action lawsuit that's building from all the people who like lost their jobs or were deeply affected by these illegal mandates and illegal bylaws that were passed. And so they've got this weird thing going on up in Canada now where the people who've been trying to challenge these things, the courts kept delaying and delaying and delaying and delaying actually hearing it, so that after the government finally did pull all those things off, the courts now finally are getting a chance to hear these cases, and they're throwing them out, saying they're moot because it doesn't matter anymore. It's like, it doesn't work that way. You guys got to pay the piper here. You gotta have to answer up for your sins, and they just don't and won't. Like, we're really living in evil times. It's just it's just really what it comes down to, is we're living in evil times, which kind of brings us back to this topic. I normally like to do a lot of research ahead of time, but this one's just going to be off the cuff tonight, and it's about doomsday hoaxes. Now, there is a lot of stuff going on right now, and you brought up about how you listened to Nick Rekieta, and he had a really good point about what he called presentism, where he was saying that, you know, every generation seems to think that they're in the end times and everything's going awry. And he's got a point. He does have a point. And I spent a lot, maybe too much time on 4chan, on poll, and there's this thing where it'll come up and it'll usually be a picture, this like highly stylized photo or GIF of Ron Paul, and it'll say happening, right? And it'll be like, this thing is happening. And what you realize after a long period of time is that nothing ever happens. I mean, it does, but it doesn't, right? Like, we were just getting ready to leave our house to go to Asuncion for an overnight to go to the mass. And that's when we got news of the Hamas attack on Israel. And I'm so jaded at this point. I'm just so jaded at this point that it's like, it comes up and just like, yeah, wake me up on the other side of it. You know, like, I mean, I'm not, you know, whatever. There was another attack or something like that. And you don't, because it's this boy who cried wolf thing that goes on, where everything is a catastrophe, that you don't quite know what you're supposed to take seriously. I mean, you know, again, the 6th day of the year in 2021, I watched it live, and then after the fact, it was being treated as if it was one of the most historic, you know, insurrections in your nation's history.
Yeah,
it wasn't even close.
It was a bunch of people on a self-guided tour. It was a big nothing. Yeah. And the thing, so from my perspective, I was watching that, and I was watching that with excitement because, like, as I said, I hate government. I would love to see Washington, D.C. razed to the ground, just a big smoldering ruin. And I don't really care who does it. You know, if Russia launched a nuke and it hit D.C., I would be happy. Now, I'm sure St. Louis is somewhere on that list of nukes coming too, but as long as they get DC first, if a bunch of rednecks gather together their guns and set the place ablazes, I'm all for it. And, you know, I'm kind of respect the British for coming in 1812 and setting the place on fire. Like, it's a place that shouldn't exist, and I just hate. I hate all governmental bodies so much. Like, I live in this city. I live in the 27th largest metropolitan area in the United States. I'm paying an insane amount of taxes, and I ride a motorcycle most places around because it's a lot faster than driving. I like doing it more, but on the bike, I'm constantly weaving in and out of potholes and street plates and weird level changes where they fixed something and then filled it in but didn't really settle it enough, so that has sunken down.
Sounds like
Or
Paraguay.
changes in surfaces, places where the asphalt for whatever reason has like bunched up like a continental plate crashing together and creating a mountain, so there's this artificial speed bump as I take a turn to get on the highway. And it's like, you are bleeding me dry with money, and you can't get a fucking road crew out here to run a steamroller through and make this stuff look nice. And then people tell me that government works, and it's like my civic duty to vote and go to jury duty. And like, what is the civics doing for me?
Not much.
Not much.
It blows my mind, actually, because, you know, anytime that I've been in the US, I always it's like you have a high expectation. This is supposed to be like the pinnacle of the first world, and it's not like that. I mean, the airports are pathetic. The roads. I don't have any experience in St. Louis. I've spent a lot of time in Seattle, and Seattle is a mess too. I mean, Seattle is an absolute disaster. But like, it's hard to fathom that you can't get the funding to fix your own stuff. Like you just,
Mhm.
and when you bring up about government like that, I'd have a very different opinion of government if the government was there to serve me. You know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah.
there to
If you
do
felt
its
like
job for me and for
any
my
one
people.
aspect of it would help you, because aside from the fire department, right?
Yes. Yep.
The There's no aspect of civil service that serves me, and really the fire department, how many times has your house burnt down in your lifetime? It does happen to people, right? But it's such an
Mhm.
isolated incident. Now, of course, they're for the fire department's first responders. If you get into a car accident, they're the ones that show up. They're the ones that pull you out of the car. They're the ones that put you in the ambulance.
Mhm.
They have a purpose, but their purpose is wholly, um, it is to protect and serve. It is to, the fire marshal comes and does inspections of buildings to make sure that it's not you're not going to cram it full of people and they're not going to be able to get out. Whereas the police department, they enforce laws more often than not against you,
Yeah.
and yet they let the crime runs rampant, and then we can't do anything to actually combat the crime because all of the ways to fight it are then deemed as being, creating systemic racism and things, and so you're trapped in these, and it happens a lot more in the cities, and then the people that live in the cities like live in this weird cognitive dissonance where they love their city and they think it's so great they don't feel safe, but they want to export those like city policies that clearly aren't working out to all
Mhm.
the people like you that live on a farm. And they want to, the people here talking about doomsday hoaxes, people here are talking about like, you need to recycle. Why don't you separate your stuff? Why don't I separate my stuff? Because the same fucking truck drives down the alley and picks up the green bin that's supposed to be grass and yard waste, the blue bin that's recycling, and the brown bin that goes to landfill. It all goes in the same truck. It's not
Yeah.
going into separate compartments in there. They just pick them up and dump them in the same truck. You really think that goes somewhere to get sorted out? Why would I waste my time? Why would I waste the space in my home for 2 trash cans to take them into 2 bins when they're all going in the same truck? Like
It's
it's all performative, but I have to do that because I live in this city of people telling me that the world's going to come to an end in 12 years from global warming. And meanwhile, like people like you, like another thing that I can feel when I leave the city on a motorcycle. There is like this moment where you can tell you've left the city because all of a sudden the temperature around you drops 5-10 degrees,
huge.
where
Yeah.
suddenly there's green space.
Mhm.
There's not all of this stuff reflecting all the heat back out, and all the people living in these concrete monstrosities are telling you in your farm in the middle of Paraguay that you can't, run a diesel generator
Yeah.
to as a backup power thing because it's going to like displace some seals, while they live in the worst offender of killing the planet that could ever possibly be.
Well, and that's where they stick the thermometers too when they're
Yes.
doing their monitoring of this climate crisis. It's like they put the I've seen pictures of these things where they're putting these thermometers in like a parking lot of a Walmart. Like
Hmm.
I've been in the parking lot of a Walmart on a regular day and it's always like burning hot. It's just it's literally black pavement and you've got a thermometer like off the ground like 2 feet, and it's like you know exactly what you're gonna get, and I think they know that,
They
but
do. Well, because
and
the other problem, so with the models, so, they use all these weather tracking stations and ground tracking stations that in the way they describe them in their model, they're equally spaced all around the planet, every 150 feet or something, whatever the distribution is. But as we all know, 60% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. They don't
Mhm.
have those
In the
little
water, yeah,
things out in the water.
no,
So what they do is they kind of curve the data to make it fit their idealized model. And
right,
so they have a weather station in Japan and they have a weather station in California, and they say like, well, this one says 100 and this one says 80. So the ones between those must read between 180 in order to make this curve work. And then they kind of fudge that and they do this like backwards regression to try and make the model make sense so that then they can go and tell us that like, global temperature is up 2 degrees and that is going to cause us all to drop dead. And it's like, and if you describe that to anyone, there's no way they would believe this hype.
And going back to your whole thing of people in cities can't defend themselves, you're in St. Louis. Isn't that where that like couple who came out with their guns on their property because there was a big mob coming out? They got in trouble. Like they got in trouble. They were being attacked. I saw a video of, and it was the other thing. Even you don't even have to be in the inner city for this. Like you don't even like if you're in the suburbs, they're like, we're gonna take it out to the suburbs because but got to make it political. And like they're going in and they're like waking people up and they're like shining green lasers into the windows so that like you blinding people and stuff. Like it's like that's why I wanted Nick and Ricada on, is because I wanted to say I don't think justice exists anymore. I think it's dead. I think you can't find you if you get justice, you're very lucky. You're extremely lucky because even if you successfully defend yourself, then you're going to have to defend yourself in court. And
I think there's a 3-tiered justice system, right? There's the people that are above the law. There are the people that have been given the exception to the law. And then there are people like you and me that are forced to interact within the scope of the law. And we have no... you don't seem to be able to move between the tiers, the castes. I think is probably a better thing to say, because celebrities, especially celebrities and politicians, they'll get caught outright breaking laws, and then it's just kind of, oh well, it's no big deal. It was a one-time thing. And then there's the people where they'll burn down entire cities. So many people died in the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020. You were just murdered by crowds. And it's like, we're not like the guy. There's a guy a couple weeks ago who was stabbed to death, I think in New York. He's with his girlfriend. This guy is screaming in her face.
Yeah, I saw that.
He stabs her boyfriend. He bleeds out and dies on the sidewalk. And she won't describe the suspect. The whole thing's on video.
Yep.
He looked her right in the face. I can't imagine if someone killed my loved one in front of me like that. I would never forget their face for the rest of my life. I would. And then the guy's friends are coming out and saying like, oh, he wouldn't want this person convicted because that's not the kind of thing he believed in. It's like, well, I kind of feel like he probably wouldn't have wanted to get stabbed to death either. And so we're collectively, holding the hands of these criminals because we would feel bad if they went to jail, which is ridiculous. It's like a completely clown world upside down turn. And in that specific case, I stopped feeling bad for the guy, because this is the kind of thing that he voted for. Like in a very, very abstract way, he set the domino that eventually toppled down until this big one came and crushed him. And like there's an irony there, and poetically, like it's terrible to have this loss of life, but it's also stunning that nobody's learned from it.
Yeah, and I think the thing that bothers me about those kind of things is that I feel like you do have a bit of a civic duty to try to put somebody else like that away so that they don't do it to somebody else. You know what I mean? But like that's a very weird thing. It's a very weird thing to go, oh, I wouldn't have done, like, would you have done it? Like, would you have reported it if the guy was white? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it something to do with socioeconomic, demographic shifts and stuff like that? Like, you have to ask yourself, like, when do we throw the book? Why have laws? Why have laws at all if you're not going to do any of these things? Yeah. And then you have the vice president of the United States was openly campaigning and getting money to bail people out during that like summer of love that happened. And that was 2020.
2020.
Yeah. And so the thing is going back to the Doomsday Hoaxes thing, it gets hard anytime I hear one, because I mean, We have friends who follow different biblical prophecies. We have, I have friends I got a friend down here who is constantly telling me about this ex-CIA agent is reporting that this is going to happen after this and this and this, and like everything's coming down to it. Like right now, like Iran is at the door. They're getting ready to preemptively strike Israel. It's going to get real nasty real quick. And I'm like, okay, but like, I mean, I've heard this before. I've been hearing this for a very long time, especially when it comes to economics. There's a guy by the name of Gerald Celente, and this guy is like, he's a trend spotter. He spots trends. And yet at the same time, this guy has been calling for a complete and total economic collapse pretty much since 2011, maybe 2010. Like every year, this is the year, this is it. And it's like, I get the feeling it's going to be boring. You know what I mean? Like when the world ends, it's going to be boring. We probably won't even like notice it. It'll just be like, just slowly but surely things will get crappier, and then your internet will cut off for a little while, and then you'll just, then some drone will fly out of the sky. You'll throw your bottles at it, and then it'll zap you, and then that's it. That's the end. That's the end of your world. And it's difficult to take any of these things anymore, because my wife and I will talk about it, and we'll be like, how much worse can it get? And the answer is much worse.
There's always somewhere they can go with it. Yeah.
Always worse.
You're like, there's no way they could make anything worse than this. And then they're like coming next summer or something, and it's just going to screw you every which way that they can. And you're like, wow, this is incredible. Yeah. Well, the thing about the doomsday, the town criers out there. I used to really like and respect Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck is actually, I don't know if I ever really talked about this on Here's What I Don't Get, but Glenn Beck was kind of, this inspiration, or not really an inspiration. I enjoyed his talk radio show, and it was something that listening to it, I thought I'd like to do that someday, just talk to people and be listening and make a difference. And so like, that was a really cool thing about Here's What I Don't Get, is I got to kind of live that fantasy that I had when I was a younger person. And, but in, 2012, 2013, when Obama's getting reelected and the Tea Party movement's happening, and Glenn Beck went from regular kind of talk radio, shock jock, boisterism to this like new learned Professor Beck character that he has now. And I still respect him to a degree, but I couldn't listen to Glenn Beck ever again. Because during that time, he's predicting that this is going to happen. And I learned a lot during that period of what he was talking about and what to read. And it definitely like opened my horizons and made me smarter and made me, it was the beginning of my red pilling, or the continuing of my red pilling or whatever. And, but he was always saying that like, you got to buy gold and get your solar generator, because the, hard times are coming, and be sure to get your food in buckets so that you can feed yourself in case, when Donald Trump gets elected, we starts World War III and stuff. And I'm not that gullible. What has become shockingly apparent to me is that so much of the populace is that gullible. And so I remember, like, I have a memory that lasts longer than 18 months. And so I remember when you said that this was going to happen, and then this was going to happen, and then neither one of those things happened. And now you're on to the next predictions. So that's what they do, is they'll, these guys will just make 100,000 predictions. And then if they can get 50 of them to be right, they'll go, see, we talked about it. And they'll throw that clip up of them calling that this thing was going to happen. And they don't play the other 900 or 99,950 times that they said something that just didn't come true. And the other thing is that they really give timetables, so that, they're not going to say, all right, on October 17th, Biden's going to send the National Guard out and like murder all the Republicans in their homes. 2023, that's going to happen on that day, 10 a.m. The troops are coming, batten down the hatches.
Yeah.
No, they're going to say something like, oh, this might happen. And if they declare martial law, yada, yada, yada. Because if you make a prediction that sharp and you're like, it's 9:55 there, Glenn Beck, where's that National Guard order coming from?
Yeah.
You would look extremely stupid.
Well, okay. So coming at it from a faith-based perspective, there's like what we call discerning of spirits, discerning prophecies. And what we'll do is, we'll say, okay, does this fit? Does this fit with like the Gospels? Does this fit with what's written in the Bible? Are you reaching out a little bit too far? Are you making up stuff on your own? If it doesn't fit, then toss it away. And secondly, if they get one thing wrong, then it's not of God. Okay, now I'll backtrack that because there is a story in the Bible, and Nick Ricada brought it up, the story of Jonah. So Jonah and the whale, right? And Jonah comes out and he gets a message from God to go and tell the people of Nineveh that God's going to smite them. Right. So he goes and he's reluctant, doesn't want to do it. And that's why he gets swallowed by the whale. Cause like all of a sudden God's getting kind of mad because he's like not going where he needs to go. And the boat gets attacked with a bunch of waves. Everybody's on the boat. They're praying. They're trying to figure out what's going on. He knows what's happening. God's mad because I'm not doing what he told me to do. So he tells them, they're like, okay, they toss him overboard and he gets swallowed by a large fish or a large whale. And he's in there for 3 days, and then he comes back up on the shore, goes and tells the Ninevites. The Ninevites take him seriously. They repent. They sit in sackcloth and ashes, and their repentance causes God to not smite them. So you have a prediction that gets changed, but because of the actions that took place. Mm-hmm. But like when somebody gives a date, a specific date, and it doesn't come true, you can know, okay, that wasn't from God. That wasn't a real prophet. That wasn't a real prophecy. And you said it yourself, like they spit out all these things, and it's a percentages game. Well, anything other than 100% is nil. It's nothing. And so the thing is that if it doesn't come true, then it never existed to begin with. And unfortunately, like we had to go through a lot of that with, like, for example, like the Q thing. With the Q thing, there was so many different predictions and prophecies and stuff like that. And I was getting it hit from, all sides with different people I talked to that were really into it. And it's like, I want to give them a chance. I want to give them I'll nod and say, okay, yeah, sure. And go along with it. But then when it doesn't come true, there was the oddest thing with the Q stuff. Like there's people that still believe it. It's still are holding on. And they say, oh, future proofs past. It's like a time code thing. And then like it didn't mean in that year. It didn't mean it in 2018. It didn't mean it in 2019. That's supposed to be for this year. And then this year comes and goes. And it's for next year, 2 more weeks. And it's like, okay, I have to drop this. You and by drop this, I mean, we don't talk about this anymore because it's a waste of my time.
Yeah.
And
that's where I've landed on a lot of this stuff. Just purely from my own, like the sake of my mental health and living my life. I could sit here and live in fear of the, next time the government's going to crack down, or what happened with them stealing the election, or whatever, rage du jour thing they have going on this week. But I'm tired of that. I mean, that's why I divorced myself from the news and politics years ago. And I've just kind of slowly, I don't know, maybe a detriment, made my life a little bit more insular. Like I'd much rather hear about, El Chaco's day in life and the pictures of your farm growing than anything that they're putting on TV anywhere. Because like I care about you. I think it's cool. I think it's cool what you're doing. I think your lifestyle is cool. I have like a little bit of envy towards that.
Well, you're going to come down here someday.
Yeah.
You're going to have
and
to see
the
it
same
in person.
way, like I'm excited to see when my friend Tim the Handlebreaker like post photos of him going to see concerts. Like I'm excited. A friend of mine. So Sunday I went and I've been pursuing this glass blowing for a year now, and I've been I've been waylaid. It's been challenging. A month ago, a little over a month ago, I fell down at work and I tore through 3 ligaments in my right ankle. And up until about a week ago, I was under the impression that I was going to have reconstructive surgery to walk again. And today I walked with unassisted other than a walking boot, and I walked I walked barefoot in my house very briefly.
Nice.
The pain
Huge.
stopped it, um but all through that, like, I kept pushing myself to go to the studio and make accommodations to be able to do that. And so my friend came and took pictures of us working yesterday,
Mhm.
and there's just this like I can see it in the pictures on my face. Like this pure determination. And he got this really great picture of my partner right after she put a really beautiful vase that she's been kind of chasing this vase shape and the color and getting it right, and she finally got like one that was great and got it in the box, and he got this perfect picture of her just like so beside herself with joy to have succeeded that way. Like I could I will never get that, and I got to feel that same kind of joy because I assisted, we worked together to do those things. Like, I'm never gonna get that feeling of joy from what's on the TV. I'm never
Never.
gonna get that feeling of
Mm-mm.
joy from what's on Facebook. You can only get that joy by going out and living and making something you know, that means something to you.
Well, and I think that there's an aspect of control through fear that is happening, and it's effective. It's really
Yeah,
effective. We're
you're
we're
absolutely
we're
right.
seeing people being controlled, like you say, going out and doing stuff and having fun. It's like, yeah, and a whole bunch of people got duped into thinking that that's unsafe and that you're somehow going to die if you go and do that. And it does come back to one of the things that I have noticed. So within my community, and by my community, I mean either the people who live around me or my social circle or my church, is that for the most part, most of us aren't afraid of dying. And that's there's a big thing
Yeah,
there. Okay. So I used to have it told to me all the time that, for example, you could tell when you're going into the hospital which family was Catholic or not, because they have a very different approach to suffering, end of life, end of like the near death time. And if you're a little bit more confident in, like, how things are going to go after the fact, you that fear doesn't work on you anymore. It doesn't work on you in the same way. And so I've found, like, for example, any of the people that I know that jump to the front of the line to get that jab, terrified of dying, just
yeah.
terrified of dying. And all these people who throw on a mask, terrified of dying. Why are you terrified of dying? What is it that you're so scared of? Are you scared that you're going to miss out on something? Like you're not going to get to see Taylor Swift in concert? Like what's the big thing holding you back here? Because the thing is that if you have nothing after it. So I feel bad for atheists, honestly, because if you have nothing afterwards, you believe that you just become worm food and it's done. Now I can understand a little bit more about why you're darn scared about everything. I can completely understand why that, like, oh no, I'm not going to see the end of this new Star Wars show on Disney Plus. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
that's what you've got going for you. That's it. And whereas, like, if so, for example, when I do have friends that bring up to me as well about the end of the world, about doomsday, about the apocalypse, and all this kind of stuff. I can always tell who they are, because like where they're at in life, because of how they feel about it. Whereas, like, for most Christians, when we believe that the fact that, like, at the end of the world, that Jesus Christ is going to come back, there's that even just that sentence that he's going to come back, for some people is like, oh no, like, what do I do? Oh, and it's like for me, it's like, I'll be like, this is awesome. Yeah, man, awesome. He's here. I've been waiting
I
for this. This is great.
See, I'm looking forward to the end of the world because I just want some fucking peace and quiet. You know?
Well, I hear you, man, because my wife and I will say this all the time. We'll be like, man, just okay, like if it's the end, like just like let's wrap this up. Like
Yeah.
it's yeah,
Let's get
like
to it.
we've overdrawn our welcome here. This is it it. It's like when you're going to a movie and it's crossing into the third hour, and you're like, oh man, like come on, man, this third act has got to wrap up at some point in time. I got a babysitter to pay, So it's it is a little bit. I think right now we're gonna get a lot more of these doomsday hoaxes.
Oh, they're
Just
never going to
because.
end. I
No,
mean,
but
they've been with us. That was one of the interesting things with your Nick Rekieta thing that I didn't know is that, uh, Paul went around talking about how he thought Jesus was going to come back in 30 years,
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
soon thereafter, right?
Mhm.
I think, probably even before that time in the
He
ancient
walked
years,
that
we've
back,
always been
but
afraid
yeah,
of this total end of the earth, and so we'll because we have this innate fear of dying, and it's one thing to die yourself, but for everything to die is, I think, a little bit overwhelming for some people. But if you think about it more spitefully, everyone that you hate will also be dead. So, that's kind of a win-win.
I
Y-
guess, yeah. Well, as our belief goes, is like there's going to be perfect justice at the end. So you're going to get to see all those people that deserve it get it. And so when it comes back to this whole justice thing, it's like, yeah, well, maybe God's not necessarily pulling the trigger on all these people. These people are getting away with it right now, but we'll know it'll be taken care of, and it'll be all wrapped up in a pretty bow. But so we had a date given and a prophecy given. So there was a Catholic priest down in Brazil, just next door to me over here, and and he was going by the name of Father Oliveira. And it came up in a lot of my Catholic circles, like this guy prophesied the death of Pope Benedict. It said around Christmas at the end of
That's
2020
the old pope, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he did die like on December 23rd or December 31st, 2022. So everybody's like, whoa, he called it. Like that was it. Like and then so he was like, he got another vision, another prophecy. And it was like, he was talking to Mary, and she said that she would give him a sign on October 13th. And so it was like, okay, all right, let's see what happens. All right, because October 13th is the anniversary of the miracle of the sun at in Fatima, Portugal. So it was like, all right, we can watch out for this. And then and then it came and went. And then I went to like, the same websites or the same YouTube channel that was like talking about this guy. And then I just put in the comments like, well, it came and went. Guess we can put this guy to bed. Like we
Mhm.
don't have to talk about him anymore. And then people were like, they were like, no, no, no. Like he said that he didn't say it was going to be a public one for everybody. He could have gotten a private one himself. And it's like, okay, enough of the moving of the goalposts. Like, if that was what it was, then we didn't need to hear about it. You didn't
Hey,
need to publish it. You didn't need to tell anybody about it. It's just keep it to yourself. Thanks. Wonderful. Great. Move on. And so, like I do believe the world will end someday. And I do believe there is a slight possibility that it could happen in our lifetime, but it could happen in anybody's lifetime. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like it could happen in anybody's lifetime. We got this what's that atomic, not the atomic
Oh,
clock, but
it's
the
the like countdown to the end of the world clock, and they make a big deal about
keep
moving it
moving
one
it up.
second closer to midnight
Mhm.
because there are a bunch of self-righteous tools that are. It's a propaganda piece to be
It's
like,
fear porn.
you're not doing what we, the enlightened elite, believe you should be doing. It's like, yeah, well, you, the enlightened elite, should maybe get around to curing cancer, and then maybe I'll start to think about anything
How
you
about you
have to say. We
How
have
about you stop
such,
false flagging each other and
yeah,
saber rattling? How about you guys? How about you knock that crap off? You guys have
we
these meetings. Why don't you just get that together? But nope.
we have such incredible suffering in the human condition, just
Yep.
globally on average. There are
Always will.
truly terrible things that happen, right?
Yep.
And there are all these like experts in their field that are researching whatever stupid shit and manufacturing viruses to attack fictional viruses. Uh And the joke is that the medicine will never find a cure to cancer because the treatment for cancer is too profitable to be worthy of actually curing it. And so instead of putting our efforts into that, we spend all this time jerking ourselves off about moving the countdown clock 1 minute closer to midnight, or virologists whose entire existence is predicated on there being the Andromeda strain, getting out on TV and going like, this is the Andromeda strain, and then it turns out it's not the Andromeda strain, it's just like a regular fucking cold. And
Well, that's how they got you with COVID, right?
Yeah,
and,
it's
and,
been
and
it's been nearly 4 years and I've never gotten it.
mm.
And the people that I tell that to will be like, you should be studied by science. Fuck them. They don't fucking want me. They can't have 1 fucking ounce of my blood.
Well, the other
When
thing
I
is,
get an apology, then maybe we can talk about figuring out why I am like superior to all of you weak-bodied people.
I don't even trust them to like draw my blood at this point. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yes,
I don't even
because
trust you to draw my blood.
We've all been to a doctor, right? Or a nurse or whatever, and they're doing the thing, they've got you all tourniqueted up and they've got the vial deal, and they're like, yeah, man, you got some weird veins. And I can't tell you how many people I know in my life where it's like, they show up and they have this horrible bruise right there in the crook of their arm. And it's like, oh man, what happened? Like, oh yeah, I had to go, they took my blood for this test because of whatever fucking thing I have going on in my life this week. And they said I have bad veins. Like, no, I think these people are just kind of shitty at their job.
Mhm.
There are so many people in life that are just shitty at their job. 50% of people are probably shitty at their job. And yet
Or vindictive. I've heard stories of nurses that have been vindictive. They've seen that somebody did not get the experimental injection, and they are vindictive about it
Mhm.
and will purposely mess up the extraction. And it's like,
It's like no, it's like what was his name? Little Fabio you had on.
yeah,
He told the story in his episode about how he was in for that surgery. He wasn't supposed to move for the 24 hours after the surgery.
the nurse
And
was
the nurse comes in there, and instead of giving him the IV medication so that he doesn't move, gives him all of the pills he's supposed to take for the next 8 hours. And because she's just fucking lazy, because that's the 50%. Part of them are bad at their job because they're stupid, and part of them are just bad at their job because they're fucking lazy. I mean, that's what I'm dealing with at my work. And this, this guy, he comes in to do this renovation and install these motors. He does a fucking horrible job at it. He's just awful at his job, and now I still have to fucking put up with him. He's the guy that has me in this walking boot because he couldn't put his box and not in the walking path. And sure, I have my own fault in that, in thinking that I could just get around it no problem. Obviously, I needed to have the box moved, but it's like, use some fucking sense. The guy is just bad at his fucking job. And so then you take that 50% and apply it to some, this is some little insignificant, it's a renovation in a theater that seats 600 people, really doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of the world, doesn't fucking matter. But you take something like a Supreme Court justice who has to make decisions on the total legality for a population of 330 million people. You take that and you put it towards some scientist who's supposed to wash their hands after they leave their bioweapons lab. You take it and you apply it to some like intelligence agency person who's supposed to make sure the switch on the Iron Dome gets flicked off and on once every 3 days.
or the CCTV cameras in
Outside of a
Epstein's
certain jail
cell.
cell. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those things happen. And it's like, how could we have possibly seen this coming? Everyone around you is an idiot. Statistically speaking, 50% of people around you are probably dumber than you are. At least.
More than that. So it's like one of the things that again it comes back to as well is this you brought it up just now. It's like this myth of competence. There's a myth of competence. There's a myth of competence at the medical level. There's a myth of competence in the scientific community. There's a myth of competence in the academic community. There's a myth of competence in government, government's got my best interest in mind. No, they don't. No, they don't. They only care about themselves. They care about getting reelected. That's it. That's all. And there's nothing more to that. And once you accept it, it does make things easier. It does make things easier. Once you accept it, you're like, okay, I'm done. Or, like there's no point in getting upset about it anymore. I do admit that I still get my news, but I get my news kind of through third-party sources. Somebody talks about it. There's shows I watch because I love a good hot take. You brought up about Glenn Beck. Part of the reason why people would have liked him back in the day is because he had hot takes. Rush Limbaugh had hot takes. I've had hot takes in the past on here's what I don't get and stuff. And you're full of hot takes. But at the same time, again, you feel like you have to sort of know what's going on, but don't get like wrapped into it too much. Don't get wrapped into it too much.
Life. Yeah.
It doesn't.
That's the thing. Like, that's the thing about these little like hate rectangles that we carry in our pockets is that it makes it so easy. It makes it so easy for all of that stuff that makes your life terrible to intrude on your real life, like the things that really matter in your world. And so, like, one of the things that I started earlier this year was, I started an Instagram, and I mostly I don't really comment on anything. I don't like things. I like to scroll through. I like to see like what my friends and my family people are posting. I like to see what like artists that I follow and people that work in the industry that I'm friends with. I like to see all that stuff, and I like to look at that and like, oh my friend. I have a friend who's out on tour with this show right now, and every day they do a handstand on their set before they strike the show, and so they post that every day, and I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool. That's like a fun little tradition that they have that I'm kind of like adjacently a part of. But what I found was, Instagram, after you've seen enough of your stuff, it wants to serve you all this other shit. And then I'm sitting there just scrolling through Instagram for no reason. So my phone has this like well-being app that will just cut you off of using any app you want. And so I set Instagram to a half-hour limit per day.
Smart.
And then when I wasn't hitting the half-hour limit anymore, I set it to 25 minutes. And now I haven't been hitting the 25-minute limit that much. So I think I'm going to drop it down to 20 minutes. It has become inconvenient because sometimes like I've scrolled through the day, but then I decide there's something I want to post. And, while you're going through all this stuff of like trying to write out your post and all these things, it's like, you only have 60 seconds left on Instagram today. And so I'll go in and change the settings. Sometimes, it's a Saturday. I really don't have anything better to do. So I'll change the settings, but those are few and far between. And you know what it's done? It's kept me. So when I want to doom scroll on my phone, I read a book, and at least there I'm divorced from like the world around me, but I'm getting something other than just,
it's way better for you.
Corporate design trash beamed straight into my eyeballs.
Well, and so I've mentioned him before, and he's a dream guest for me at some point in time. But the probably the most popular, well-known exorcist in the world right now is Father Chad Ripperger.
Oh, I was going to say Russell Crowe.
No, yeah, who got to play the previous most popular exorcist. Father Chad Ripperger, who is featured a lot on Sensus Fidelium, Steve Cunningham's page. The thing that he says is he talks about doing a media diet, right? And so when he gets up, he likes to stay engaged. He likes to know what's going on in the world, but he doesn't want to like let it take over his life. So what he does, because I mean, so much of his life is devoted to actual prayer. Go figure, right? Like an actual, oh wow, he's actually praying during the day and meditating and doing priest things. And then he goes off and helps people in their lives when he's freeing them and liberating them with spiritual warfare. But what he talks about is this media diet thing where he says he gets up and after he's done his prayers in the morning, he will limit himself to 1/2 hour. And that's a half hour of everything. That's checking his emails. That's looking at the news. That's doing all those things. And he crams it into 1/2 hour and then he shuts it down. And it's done for the day. I would love to get to that point. Unfortunately, my work doesn't allow for that. I have to be online for a lot of my stuff.
Yeah.
But, and I've mentioned this, I probably, maybe I mentioned this with Nick, maybe I didn't, but in my work, so I do marketing. And when we market to people, when we want to get people to click on our stuff, I don't go into the full clickbait stuff, but I'm clickbait adjacent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we do to keep people reading, and I was taught this when I was early on in my career, they said you want to play off of those visceral, those deep emotions from people. And the two that you work on when you're dealing with people in stocks is greed and fear. Greed and fear. And the fear could be a fear of missing out on the greed. But like what, so because I know that fear is so powerful with marketing, well, you know, when it comes to like letting people know this thing and blah 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 blah, and these guys are going to solve it. Fear is easy to write about. It's easy to drum up. It's easy to get people scared. You know, and people, I don't know why, but we've gotten ourselves so addicted to being
Well,
scared.
there's a great quote, Men in Black.
Okay.
Tommy Lee Jones tells Will Smith, he says, um, a person isn't a problem, but people are panicky, reactionary things, something along those lines, and you know it. And that's like that line has stuck with me for a long time. And that, yeah, I worked in the haunted house industry for a couple of years, long time ago, with Tim from Here's What I Don't Get.
So did I. I was a doctor.
Our friend, our friend Truckin' and Tuckin'. We basically like ran this haunted house for 2 years, and you know, it's easy to scare one person by jumping out and you know, saying boo, and you get that like immediate reactionary thing.
Jump scare.
It's another thing to actually build true fear. And it's easier to build it in a bigger group than it is for to build it in one guy. And so that's what they're doing. You know, that's what you're doing in the news is if you get it, you know, enough of the fear into the well, it just kind of spreads out there. I mean, that's what happened to us during the pandemic was they got enough people afraid of what this could be, because we don't know the answers to all these questions. And rather than approaching it from like a rational, calm, you know, this is a terrible example, but you know, when 9/11 happened, George W. Bush gave a speech from the White House. I'm sure he was in some bunker somewhere, but he talked about that we need to live our lives and we're going to allow this, and we will not falter, we will not fail. It's it was a very reassuring speech. And I don't remember Donald Trump making that speech of being like, why don't we all fucking take a deep breath? It's just the cold. Like, we can't allow ourselves to not live our lives. You know, that was what the world needed. The world needed to be told that we're not all going to die.
Nobody did that one. Nobody did that one. And I remember when the first time I saw the stats coming out, and I was like, 98.5, 99%. Like, what? And I was like, all right, it's over. Like, let's wrap it up. And then I'm going to go pick up my kid from the neighbor's house, and they're still like masked up. And I'm like, what are you doing? It's over. But it wasn't over. Like, it wasn't over.
Far from it.
And it's like, well, but 1.5% is a lot of people. Like, yeah, like, and of that, how many of those people were on death's door to begin with? You know, like it was in the nursing homes that most of the things were going down. So fear is working on people, and it works so well. Like, for example, like with this ongoing, the conflict of the week. We've been seeing so much of this atrocity propaganda, right? It's where you will get photos of something that's supposed to stir in you and get you really upset. And it's funny you bring about the you know, people and crowds. It's the same thing, like even in other emotions. So, for example, it's really hard. I think some of the most uncomfortable stand-up comedy routines I've ever seen were in front of a very small group of people, because you're not going to get that big wave of laughter, that like permission to laugh. There's a comedian. Oh, I forget her name. It's a blonde lady.
Amy Schumer?
No.
Liza Schlesinger?
No, none of those. Oh, it'll come to me. But she did this one comedy special and it was really awkward. Like
Are
I
you talking
used
about
to think she
Nanette?
was great. What's that?
Nanette?
No,
No.
no, no. She used to hang with like Brian Posehn and like um Patton Oswalt a lot. And she was in that
Mhm.
same kind of gang. And like she did this one comedy special and she was, getting a little artsy about it and decided that she was going to do an impromptu comedy set for her parents in their living room.
I used to be like you. I used to know the difference between right and wrong. But then I moved to Los Angeles and I lost 10 pounds because they take away the food before you're done. You're done. I had the stomach flu for a month and a dozen people came up to me and said, "You look amazing." I know. Have you ever thought about how thin we'll be when we're dead? I was at my grandma's funeral and I was like, thank goodness it's open casket because you got this, girl. You finally got this.
So it's just like her doing it in front of her parents in the living room. It was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable because like her parents are on the clock to like it. They got to like it. It's that whole thing of like somebody like tells you this is their favorite movie and they put it on and they're like looking at you the whole time, like waiting for you to like love it. You got to love it the way I love it. You got to love this thing. And it's like, I can't give you what you want me to give you right now.
I got one worse for you. Harlan Williams did a comedy special. This is pre the pandemic. I will remind you. That's just him on a butte, and that's it.
But you're looking around and going, there's nobody here. How will we know when to laugh? Well, you know what? I think you're smarter than that. You don't need people here. You don't need to cut away to people going, I think you know when to laugh just fine. And if for some reason you run into a little trouble, I'm going to help you out. If I think you're missing something, I'm going to throw a handful of sunflower seeds in your face.
He is in the middle of fuck nowhere with a microphone telling jokes. And it was surreal and completely not funny.
It's there's something about feeding off of a crowd, right? Oh, it's the same thing as like during the lockdowns when there was like baseball games with like cardboard cutouts of people in the crowd. And then WWE did the same thing. They did the Thunderdome where they put like a bunch of like screens up in the crowd and then had people streaming zoom in to watch. And it was like,
we came this close to getting that in Tulsa.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This close.
Tulsa, tell them whose game this is.
It's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. And so I know that there's this thing where we like to feed off of each other. It's the same thing of like eating a meal by yourself or eating a meal with a big family gathering for Thanksgiving or something.
Much rather eat a meal by myself. You're absolutely right.
But there's a magic in numbers, and they know this, and they know that they can feed this out there. That's why, again, all this propaganda was just constant reinforcement of group think, of group behavior, to make you think that if you don't think the same way as the group, then you're weird. You're the weirdo. You're the outcast. You're not going to work out here. And unfortunately, like the thing that I've brought up before is that it works a lot better on women than on men. There's a biological reason for that. So, for example, back like in our ancestors' times, where the men would get in to gather for go on a hunting trip to go and get food for the families, they would go off, and the women would be left there for a while, and they'd have to get along. They'd have to get along. Because if you don't get along, then you don't have the support of the community, and your husband might not come back from this trip. It's the same thing with war, right? And so you have this thing where you'll have somebody was pointing out about this, about how there's this psyche, there's this mindset of a lot of different people who a lot of times with effeminate men and not all women, but it seems to be a predominantly women, where there's this need for approval, this need for group approval. So they don't want to be the outcast, even if it's not right. It's just they're doing this, they're saying this thing or doing this thing so that they can get approval from everybody else. They just don't want to be that person who's like the odd man out. It doesn't feel right. And it does go back to those times, because again, if your husband did die on that hunting trip or in that war, then your need to rely on the community is enhanced. You really have to get along with everybody else. You want them to get along with you, help you with raising your kids. You need that group approval. And if you're just like, like out there, and again, it probably got bred out of women with like things like the witch trials and stuff like that. So if you were a little bit out of whack or a little out of keel, then you get actually accused of something that would put you on the stake. So you have to give some sympathy, some empathy to how that developed. But we're seeing it right now. I mean, again, like in Canada during the last election, the guy whose party I voted for wasn't allowed in the debate. He was the only one who was against the mask mandates. He was the only one who didn't like the injection mandates. The only one. They couldn't have him up there. So they actually put all the other leaders of all the other parties, and they all went one by one, and they all agreed that everybody should get the shot. Everybody should be masking. We all should be doing these things. Not one.
We're all in this together.
We've come so far in the fight against COVID, it's time to finish this pandemic for good. So get vaccinated. If you know someone who hasn't, talk to them. For our kids, for our communities, for our economy. It's how we get forward together.
Vaccines are safe and effective for use. Vaccines are the best way for you to protect yourself, your family, and your community. So get vaccinated. Let's fight COVID-19 together.
Pour vous protéger vous-même, pour protéger les plus fragiles d'entre nous, pour protéger l'ensemble de la population, le meilleur moyen connu demeure le vaccin. S'il vous plaît, soyez responsables, soyez solidaires, faites-vous vacciner. Merci.
We all agree getting vaccinated is the way forward. We're all in agreement this is not a partisan issue, so please get vaccinated.
We're united, and it's time to get the shot. Vaccines save lives, they're how we're going to beat COVID, and it's time for everyone to do it. Get the shot.
Get the shot.
Iota of disagreement. And so you bring up about Trump, and yeah, where was he, man? Didn't do it. And he would do his little loosey-goosey things, like, he'd say, I still believe in your freedom, but I really think you should be getting this.
And it's great. And you know what? I believe totally in your freedoms. I do. Bree, you got to do what you have to do. But I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good. Take the vaccines. But no, that's okay. That's all right. You got your freedoms. But I happen to take the vaccine.
Yeah, he kept saying, like, well, when after the election, we'll have to reevaluate what Fauci's doing. Like, no, if he's doing a shitty job, fire him.
Do it now.
You wouldn't. You drive to Escoucion, it's what, an hour and a half?
Yeah, about 2 hours, hour and a half.
2 hours, right? If you got a flat tire right after leaving your house, are you going to ride that flat tire all the way into town and see if it'll work out? No. You pull over and you change the fucking tire.
But that's just not where we're at, and that's not how you have to understand. No, it's about group control. It's not nobody is trying to win my vote. They don't care about my vote. My vote doesn't matter to them. They care about all my other neighbors who are a lot easier to win over in the vote. And that's why they want to flood out the demographics so they can find people that are more susceptible to that kind of groupthink. And that's just the way it is. And so it works. It's effective for the people who rule all around the world. It works. They all do it. I mean, and there is no good guy. It's not like you can go like, oh, Putin, he's based. No, he's not. No, he's not. He was all about those mandates as well. He's signed on for the Agenda 2030 and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. And again, it comes back to the whole, like, if you say that you don't support climate emergency measures, then you're the heretic. You're excommunicated from the community. You're not allowed in. And it might sound hypocritical coming from somebody who does call people heretics, who don't, if you don't believe in, if I've got Catholics that come up in their thing, they're like, that's heretical. You can't say that. That's not okay. We're at this stage now. It's funny because all this atrocity propaganda, all of this stuff that we've learned in the last 3-4 years, I'm getting to the point where I'm so jaded about it. I wouldn't say immune. I'm not going to say I'm immune yet, but I'm close, because there's so many things we'll get accused of something, or something will come up, and my BS detector just goes off, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. This doesn't sound right to me. And it's just like you mentioned about the Iron Dome not working. I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm at this point now where it's like, I don't know. Like, I've seen how the controls are at that border.
In the conversation we had, you implied that maybe the Iron Dome never worked, but which
Well,
maybe
you know me.
Maybe
You know me
that
and
was
my
the
domes.
propaganda was, you put that out there and you go, we have the most, the strongest, most undefeatable military in the world. And you just keep saying that for decades. Like, we've really got our asses kicked in a lot of these non-wars that have come up since the 1950s. Are we really the greatest military might in the world? Or are we just, are we that big guy that walks around talking a lot of shit, and then the little guy finally takes him out?
Well, it's specifically, the Iron Dome. I had some skepticism on. The main one that I have a huge amount of skepticism on is the Samson option. And I'm not talking about short sleeve Samson. I'm talking about Israel stating that if they get attacked, they will basically just launch nukes everywhere and take out the whole world. This, like the biblical Samson who pulled on the 2 pillars and just boom, 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 boom. And I think about that and I go, well, okay. Like, at that stage, it's not like I can do anything. It's like, there's nothing I would be able to say or do or anything like that, except for afterwards, in
All you can
the
do is
afterlife,
trust.
watching and seeing, like,
Yeah.
what's God going to say to these guys? I mean, like, he's probably pretty frustrated with them for all the other stuff they do. This one takes the cake, like, what did you do?
You're exactly right. Like, what is a global thermonuclear war? Like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do about that? I can't.
Nothing.
If the war wants to come down my street and pick a fight, I'll go out and die. I don't care. But if we're going to talk about some like jack fucked up country on the other side of the planet that I do not give a single shit about, kind of just wiping us all out of their own pride,
what a great way to go, though.
Do?
What a great way to go. You didn't even know. It was just like,
and even in a world, so I really enjoyed the Fallout games. It's the nuclear war happens between China and the United States and Russia and all that. And all these people go and hide in the vaults, and then some of them come out and there's like a new society and all this stuff. And they're fun, right? I don't want to live in the Fallout world. Looks awful. If I have to, if by some miracle I survive and I have to keep on fighting, then I'll keep on fighting. But, I'm perfectly happy to get wiped out by a giant meteor at this point. Just fucking make it end.
So you brought up about my lifestyle out here, right? And we talk about this a lot in the house. Is like, look, I raised tilapia. I'm now raising sheep. I've got ducks. My wife's got a beautiful giant garden, and we just put up another set of crops up in the other corner of my property. We're growing corn, we're growing mandioca, we're growing beans, we're growing all those kind of things. So at the end of the day, it's like, look, I did everything I could. If you're going to shut down the grid, okay, I've got backup for that. If you're going to shut down the internet, okay, we'll figure it out. Like, it's fine. You're going to nuke the world and I'm down to like the last little bit. Okay, we'll eat what we got. And if that's my time to go, it's my time to go. And I did my best. That's it. And it's funny because you bring up about like, selling survival foods and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, you buy some and then you have it and then that's it. right? Like, who
Yeah.
cares? After that, it's okay. I got it now. Next, on with the show. I can't be scared anymore. Because if I wake up every day, I'm causing this invisible stress load to just sit on my shoulders for no reason. It brings me no benefit. I've done my part. I've moved out of the city. I've got my food. I've got my water. I'm working on getting a backup power supply. But the reason I'm actually getting the backup power supply is because, well, my power goes out sometimes here, as we've seen in the show before.
Yeah.
And I gotta work. I gotta do some work. And also too, it's really hot, and I wouldn't mind having some air conditioning when like the power goes down. But I'm not sitting like I have this friend of mine who keeps me updated all the time. The guy who's giving me all these CIA reports and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, and like I have lots of Catholic friends who message all the time, and they're going, "Oh, can you see what's happening in the Vatican right now? They're doing a synod and everything's going to heck and all this kind of stuff." And what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Right? You're going to pray and you're going to stay in a state of grace. That's all my advice is for you. Pray, stay in a state of grace, and hope for the best. If it's your time to suffer, suffer like a man. Like suffer with dignity. And if it's not your time to suffer, then don't fret on it. It's just not worth it. And then when it comes to the, like the political side of things, look, man, they're always going to cheat you. They're always going to lie to you. They're always going to take more than they deserve from you until what? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? You're going to rally the troops? You're going to rally the troops? Are you going to get your own militia going? Okay, good. You got my support. Go for it. Have fun.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go for it. Have fun. But like, go ahead and try to like rally that in this world. I can't even talk to my neighbor and like bring up about like what I think about Pfizer and its history without like, having to get into a long conversation about it. You're not going to get anywhere with that. That's not the route. That's not the method that's going to work anymore. So what you're going to do is you're going to live your life to the best of your ability, enjoy things, enjoy your life, stay in a state of grace. Don't become a jerk. Don't go stealing from people. Don't go lying. Don't go doing all those other things. Stay in a state of grace and you'll be good. Everything will be fine. You'll be happier. You will be happier for it. And
if you live with honor, you'll go to Stovacor. It's very simple.
Exactly. But it's there's this, I think there's this primal thing. I think going back to, I think there's something there on this fear of death thing. I think there's really something there on that. I think we live in a post-religious time. Post-religious time. I am completely the weirdo in percentage-wise for somebody who actually takes his faith seriously. I have, if I go in my bubble, I'm not the weirdo. I've got a big bubble of people who all think along the same lines and they're trying their best and doing the things that they can. Go ahead.
Can I illustrate this? I have a really good like personal illustration of the difference between you and I'll say the average Catholic, right?
Okay.
So, and this is kind of behind the scenes and everything, but when El Chaco came back to Here's What I Don't Get a little over a year ago, one of the conversations we had was about my using of the GD phrase very frequently.
Which is totally banned on the show. I've let you get away with a lot of F words and S words. It's great. But like that one is complete no here.
So one of the things that I did on the show was I tried, and I think largely successfully, eliminated the use of GD
and JC the wrong way. Yep.
On especially your episodes, but I also limited its use elsewhere in my life out of respect for you and your beliefs.
Thank you.
Right. Now, in my real day-to-day life, I work with a practicing Catholic who is a person in like I don't know the words, but it's like the Archbishop's choir. It's this hand-selected small choir out of whatever diocese in St. Louis there is. Yeah. And so we were working the other day, and this is really weird for me too, because we're working, and she used JC in the way that I would use JC. And I was stunned. I was like, what? It's one thing for me to say it. as a non-Catholic, but you really fucking going a little bit too far here, my friend. And I mean, I was stunned because that's like basically the two of you are my
Your examples, your
yeah, and
sample
so
set.
yeah, it was this weird dichotomy where
Bad
I
catechesis.
could
It's
not believe what I was hearing with my ears, with my delicate virgin sensitive ears.
it's a shock. It's a shock. It shouldn't be happening. And the thing is that the sad part is that it's been normalized. So when I had E. Michael Jones on this last week, I brought that up. It's been written into all these scripts and stuff like that. Like one of my favorite comedy shows of all time was It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I can't watch it. I can't watch it. I can't enjoy it anymore. I try and I can't. They use it far too much, And it's like, I 1 year I bought what I believe okay. So, The Simpsons, right? I used to believe that The Simpsons, like, I'm going to say maybe I'm going to be very generous and say the first 10 seasons. A lot of people will cut it off at like the first 8, but I'm going to be very generous and say the first 10 seasons. So I bought my wife the entire first 10 seasons on DVD, and I was putting them on Plex, and I was like going through it. And I was like, yeah, because this is a part of our youth, like these are classics. And Devin Stack of Black Pill did a video where he broke down The Simpsons on religion, specifically on Christianity, and he hammered away on it.
Ned Flanders is like this worthless dipshit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not just that, the way they depict God is a worthless dipshit. The way that they depict Jesus Christ is like that. Like, it's horrible. It's horrible. And it's comfortable. They can do that. They're allowed to do that. And they do that all the time. So when people complain about The Simpsons now being degenerate or woke or whatever, it's like, come on, man. Like, it's kind of always been. We just didn't notice it as much before. And I explained it to another friend of mine who is converting right now. And I was saying to him, I was like, what ends up happening, I had it explained to me really, really well by a priest of mine when I was converting. And it kind of similar to what you're saying about, like, when you hear somebody say it, like, you have a different reaction all of a sudden, just because the importance, at least within that faith. And so when I remember when I was coming back in, and I said to him, I was like, it's weird. Like, I was watching Game of Thrones when I was going through my conversion, and we were watching it. And I remember after I had converted, and we were watching a couple episodes, and I was like really uncomfortable. And not like I'm being all pious about it. I'm like, I'm watching it. I'm like, okay, we got the sex, and we got the nudity, and we got the violence. And all of a sudden, and I'm like, after a while, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. It's not enjoyable to me anymore. And this priest said to me, he goes, because like I lived in Calgary, and a big thing for Calgarians is to drive out to the mountains, to go to the Rocky Mountains, to go to Banff, which is absolutely impeccable, great place to go. Beautiful, right in the mountains is Mountain Ski Lodge town. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. One of the best places on earth. And, a lot of times if you drive in there, sometimes you get hit with a snowstorm on your way back out. So he described it. He says, it's like you're driving in your car and you're in a snowstorm and the snow is pelting on you. You could barely see the road. And, I've been taught, like, you got to look for the line and try to get all the way home. And you get home and you park your car and you're like, see, I didn't die. Like, I didn't die. Everything's fine. But if you wake up the next morning and you don't clear off the snow off of your windshield, then now you're being really unsafe. Like, you got through this thing, but now you know better. Now you know better to clear off that windshield so you can actually see, so that when you do clear off that windshield and you do get those little flecks of mud or something on there, now you start to notice them more. right? So you when you have a clear windshield and you get a fleck of mud on there, you start to notice it a lot better than you did before. So once you start cleaning up your act, once you start kind of nailing off these things where you're going, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore, or this isn't good for me. It's like if you talk to anybody who's like going through the process of getting back in shape or eating right or something like that, my wrestlers, they used to take great care of themselves, great care of their bodies. But what they would do is they would have their show night on Sunday, and then on the Monday they would have their cheat day. And so their cheat day was when they could eat whatever they wanted, and they would just pile in the calories. But anytime that I've ever tried to like lose some weight and eat right and do things the right way, that's that first meal afterwards that you have with it's like really greasy or really sugary or something like that. Like for example, I can't stand Coca-Cola or Sprite or any kind of pop these days because it's just too sweet for me. It's because I haven't had it for so long that like all of a sudden you hit it and I'm not accustomed to it anymore. It's like a shock to the system. And so I find that with when it comes to people who are casually throwing out JCs, casually throwing out GDs, once you eliminate them, once you make a conscious effort to eliminate them, they do pop in your head when somebody brings them up. It takes work to get it out of your system, but once you do, that's when all of a sudden like you hear it and you go, "Ooh, God, what was that?" You know, and it makes movie enjoyment. It doesn't eliminate movie enjoyment, but it definitely changes it. And so, like when I was saying with EMJ, when I watch a lot of these movies now, my wife and I will be watching them and we'll go, like I see what they're doing. Okay. And then we pull out the phone and do the early life and that makes sense. Okay. Now I know why it's doing that. And so you get this idea afterwards of like, okay, this is why things are the way they are. And it's because it's been so normalized. It's just been so normalized. I have a British friend who comes over for dinner every Sunday, and we were talking about this, and he didn't like the idea that I was having that talk with the MJ because he goes, oh, the Americans, the British, we used to laugh at the Americans all the time. They had to have all these codes and all these rules and stuff like that. We never had any of that because we're sophisticated and we don't have to have all these kind of things and we don't get offended by these things. And I'm like, no, it's because you normalized it. Because he goes, adultery. I don't see why there's a big problem about having adultery in a movie. You don't have to have a rule on that. I'm like, well, yeah, of course you wouldn't, because for 500 years since King Henry VIII left the Catholic Church to commit adultery, your whole culture has been worked on to make adultery not that big of a deal. And Devin Stack has pointed this out a lot of times on Black Pilled, where he goes back and he looks at these movies over the years and he's pointing out like they were working on this. There was a movie called Divorce Inc. starring Dick Van Dyke, right? So Dick Van Dyke is
cleanest comedian that's ever existed.
Yeah. And what did people know him for? They knew him from the Dick Van Dyke Show. And he was the dad, and he came in and he did the little floppy do thing when he came in the door, but it was a family sitcom, right? What else did they do? Who played his wife on
Mary Tyler Moore?
Mary Tyler Moore. What did they do with Mary Tyler Moore in her first solo show afterwards? She was a divorcee. That was a big deal on television. She was a divorcee. I'm going to make it off after all. And it was all a big thing to empower this single woman who had just gotten out of a divorce. And so, like, it's been there the whole time. They keep peppering you with these things to make it normal, to make it totally okay. And we just don't notice it so much until you start to notice. And if you become, once you pick it off a couple of times, you start to notice it everywhere. It's all over the place. And we've been drenched in it for like 70 years. Since the code fell, we have definitely been pummeled with this stuff over and over and over again. So this Catholic friend or this Catholic coworker doesn't surprise me, Because the thing is that it's not like any of the Novus Ordo Church Catholics are getting properly catechized to know you shouldn't be saying that one. And if you did say it that way, don't you go and receive communion until you've given a good confession. Before you go and do that, you're not supposed to receive communion outside of a state of grace. And if you're bellowing those out all the time, that's it's in the top 10 commandments. It's obviously important enough to God for you to knock it off. So if you don't, then you're not where you want to be. And so, and the other thing is that people will do this a lot. They'll make excuses, right? They'll make excuses as to why they can't do this or do that. And we all do it. We all do it. I'm smoking a cigar. I'm smoking a cigar right now. I like cigars, but I got a bad taste in my mouth, and I know that it's from the cigars, and I've been having just too many lower quality cigars. So I got to work on that and make sure that I'm not having those things. We know these things are bad for you. You're not supposed to do them, and yet here you are, El Chaco, smoking another cigar on the stream. But it's worth working on these things. It's always worth working on these things. So when it comes to what you take in for news media or memes or all those other kind of things like that, understand that they do have an impact on you. They always will have an impact on you. Even if you think you're immune, you're not. They will find a way to scare you. They will find a way to scare you. If this one doesn't work, they'll hit you with the other one. That's why the news cycle is so fast these days. It's so fast these days. And the reason why these people have such short memory, I think it's a cope. I think it's honestly like a survival mechanism to just drop those things because they're constantly getting scared. It's like they're living in the jungle and the lights are never on, and they're constantly looking for that next tiger to jump out at them. It's biological. It's right in your brain, and it's just always going to hit them. And they know that. They pull that string all the time.
Yeah. I tried to explain to some people recently about how we can just be completely misled and choose what is important based on what they're putting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you're divorced from it, none of them, the programming just doesn't hit. The programming never hit about Ukraine because I was never plugged into it. The program is not hitting now because of it, with the Israel stuff, because I'm not programmed into it. The whatever the next thing is, they tell us to jump and then we jump. And it's that's why I would love, I would really love if some terrorist organization wiped out the internet for 45 days.
Yeah.
And then everybody would suddenly wake up and be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be taking pictures of my food and posting it on Instagram because who could possibly fucking care? Maybe I don't need to get into petty arguments with my distant relatives about whatever political party that they support this time because it doesn't fucking matter. I only see them twice a year. How much of our lives is governed by social media?
It's a gift.
Yeah.
I used to care so much about sports, man. I got into writing because I was a sports editor. I got into writing because I wrote. I became a professional writer because I
Did you ever
wrote
write about my favorite team.
Oh, hey, look at you. Yeah, you went to a game and everything. So the thing is I used to care so much about it. I used to spend so much time watching sports. And thanks to the last 4 years, I barely care at all. I barely care at all about them because they don't matter. Time with my family matters. Time on in my yard, time with my dogs. Those things matter. The whether or not the Calgary Flames beat the Washington Capitals tonight doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because none of it matters. My team, the Calgary Flames, they were one of the first teams that they weren't mandated to do so, that made it so that you couldn't enter the games if you didn't have the vaccine. So, okay. All those years, all those jerseys, all those tickets, all those video games, all those everything, waste of time, total waste of time. And all those people who are like, oh, sports ball, huh? How'd the sports ball go? They were right. They were right.
Those people also have those things being destroyed because, as someone who's not into sports ball, they're doing absolutely everything they possibly can to bleach away any of the meaning of what mattered to me. With Star Trek, the exact polar opposite of sports.
Yeah.
And they just keep bleaching away. So, so I've been I've been reading a lot of Star Trek books over the last few years, and what I've really latched onto is all of the stuff that happened after the end of Deep Space Nine, which was a series that ended in like 1998, 1999, somewhere in there. And um, there were movies that happened after that. Voyager ended after that, but what ended up happening was all these writers started writing books that were set after the end of Deep Space Nine, and they did a really good job of kind of tying them all together. And so there's 20 years of this interconnected book universe that is pretty consistent with the tone of the TV shows, and it kind of sets up how the characters get to where they are in the movies and really expands on. There's like all this really interesting stuff, and I've been reading those and reading those, and I've been really enjoying them. And then I found out that in 2020 they released a trilogy of books where, and I haven't read these, but I now know that they exist out there, where what they did was the characters of this, book universe discover an anomaly, and basically the anomaly collapses their book universe so that the modern Star Trek universe that's on television that I don't believe exists can exist.
It's not canon.
and I'm just like, why would you do that? Just stop writing new books. You don't need to like implode all of, because what it basically does is it's like, oh yeah, everything that you read for the last 10, I wasn't reading them live, but if you were reading them live, everything you read for the last 20 years doesn't matter. Fuck you. You should enjoy this new show that we have developed for seemingly the express purposes of offending you, our target demo.
Hi. And forget the past, kill it if you have to,
I see that stuff, and I'm just like, oh yeah, you hate me and you don't want me to like your franchise anymore, but you know what, I hate you too. So at the end of the day, when the chance comes, I think I'll beat you in a fight because I'm larger and angrier, and I haven't consumed as much soy.
Well, that was that cultural vandalism thing that I talked about too.
Absolutely.
And I've seen that a lot. And it just keeps coming up over and over again. And I love it because it makes me reevaluate my interests and my loves. And, I do go out of my way to buy DVDs of programs that I really liked, that were funny, that were well made. And I can look at them and go, okay, this was a time period where writing mattered, art mattered. Now it's just about checking boxes, making sure. And I mentioned that to E. Michael Jones as well. I said to him that it's almost like we've got a reverse code now, where if you don't meet these new standards, then you're not going to get greenlit. You're not allowed. And so, for example, I brought up about Top Gun Maverick. I haven't seen it yet, but I've been told it's really good. And people were amazed. They're like, wow, it's not woke. It's not like it's not over the top and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like,
it's like a real movie.
It's the way they were all this time. But tradition is one of those things that scares the elites. They don't want they don't want tradition anymore. Okay, so even in looking in the Catholic Church right now, they're in the synod on synodality, which nobody can even define what synodality means. So it's just this way for them to kind of rewrite the rules, and everybody's looking at this going, well, you can't rewrite the 10 Commandments, and you can't rewrite the Gospels, and you can't do all that kind of stuff, because if you do, you're in schism, you're a whole new religion, and you're basically another Protestant sect. You can't do that. It doesn't work. You can't just throw away 2,000 years of tradition. So
would you like to sing a song about it?
What's that?
About tradition.
I don't know if I want to. Oh, tradition.
Yeah.
Tradition.
Fiddler on the
Roof. That's a stage guy reference
Paul,
right there.
Yeah.
Have you had to do the Fiddler on the Roof a bunch of times?
I have done. We had a touring show of it come through one of the theaters I worked for, but I've never been on a production team for it.
Never seen it. Never took it in. Musicals aren't my thing usually. Yeah.
Oh yeah, musicals suck.
Some of them are okay, but not that one.
Actually, Fiddler on the Roof is one of the few ones that I will accept because it's my problem with musicals is that have you ever seen The Music Man?
Mm-mm. No.
So the Music Man, the plot of the Music Man, Harold Hill, I think that's his name. He's a traveling salesman. He goes into these towns, promises them that he can like get them this marching band thing going, sells them a bunch of instruments, and then flees town with the money. And so he's created this bad vibe for traveling salesmen. So he shows up in this new town, Riverside, Iowa, or River City, Iowa.
Sounds like the
And
monorail episode of The Simpsons. Was that based
probably
on that?
making fun of this movie. And so there's a music teacher, and they fall in love and all this stupid shit. But at one point, and this was I was in like the 4th or 5th grade, and we're watching The Music Man on tape in elementary school. And this is where I probably should have been diagnosed with autism. They probably just pulled me out of the classroom and just been like, Tab, you're autistic. You really need to settle down, because he has this buddy, this like fat loser guy, and he needs to go do something with the music teacher. So he tells the fat loser guy to kind of distract the whole town. And the guy starts doing this whole song and dance, and it turns into this gigantic dance number, Shaboopy, which is this fucking nonsensical song. And they're just dancing around. And I'm watching this as a kid, and I'm thinking in my head, he's making up this song as he goes. He's making up these dance moves as he goes. And all these people know all the song words and the dance moves, and this doesn't make any sense. How does this make any sense? They're just singing and dancing. Why are they singing and dancing? And I was incensed. And so that's my big problem with musicals. Like, how these people know the songs and dances to these things. It doesn't make any sense.
It's all surreal.
Fiddler on the Roof makes sense because it's a very insular, traditional community where they
Right.
know all the
They
same
would
like
know the
cultural
song.
references. And I'm like, well, and the first song is tradition, and I'm 100% on board. We're all a bunch of Jewish people living in Russia, so we know all the same songs and dances because that's our culture.
Makes sense.
So let
Makes
us please
sense.
continue. Please continue with your story.
I forgot where I was, and that's okay. I think actually we've probably been going on here about an hour and 45 minutes, and we've talked a bit about Doomsday Hoaxes, and I gotta say, man, I love having you on. I want to have you on again real soon, because in a future episode, I've discussed this with you already. I'm going to be bringing on a guy by the name of Zachary King. And Zachary King is probably one of the most fascinating storytellers I've ever heard. And he's an ex-Satanist, high wizard was his title. He'll describe the whole thing, how he got into it, how he got out of it. But because I've heard the stories before many times, I want to have you on simply for reaction, and even for an autistic reaction. I want you to call out these things, but I really want to get your reaction on these things because they're so fascinating. That's the thing that I've been really enjoying about doing this show so far, is bringing on people with fascinating,
interesting things to talk about. Yeah,
interesting topics, interesting stories, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't plan on running out of those as we go. So next week, Mark will be on. He ran for office in Canada. He was also blocked from going into the debates because his party was, they used the term thinly veiled white supremacist organization. That's why he wasn't allowed in. He tried to sue them. So I'll get it out of him as well. But yeah, man, this has been great. I think as I put it before, because again, I don't listen to Joe Rogan anymore, but I did listen in the early days.
This has been very interesting. We were up to 379 motherfuckers. I want to thank you for tuning in. This is we're going to do this much more often now that I have this set up.
I listened a lot in the early days, and one of the things that I liked about it was he kind of had his gang. He kind of had his guys that he would bring back on over and over and over again. And I consider you a part of that, of my gang. And I want to make sure that I have you on more. I want to have a show with you and with Sully, and try to get a couple more of those going. Get casual and have some good chats, good bants. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and showing up in the live chat here. It does make it a lot easier to emote and to keep talking. I apologize. I wanted to have one every week, but sometimes it doesn't always work that way. When we had Lil Fabio on for technical reasons, we had to do it not live. With E. Michael Jones, that was in the middle of the day. Most of you guys have jobs, or at least I hope you do. And so it's really hard to get in those kind of things. And my time zone is getting out of whack again. So we do this whole thing. Daylight savings, one of my least favorite things in the world. I sprung forward. We're in springtime. You guys are going to fall back, I believe, around Halloween. So
just after, yeah.
Once that happens, then there's going to be another hour of difference from me to you. My main clients are in Vancouver. And so when that goes down, I'm going to have a 5-hour difference. It's going to suck.
That's amazing.
But
yeah.
it's fine, actually, because then I can work in the morning, get something done by lunchtime, and they're still waking up and getting in their inbox at that time. But yeah, man, this has been another edition of High Trust, Low Context. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm El Chaco, and thank you again, Birt.
Thanks for having me.
This is us signing off. Viva Cristo Rey.